So as we wrestle with the reality of the trend that only 4% of this generation will follow Christ, I think, we could all list out a laundry list of things that got us to this point. But I don't think that's as important as thinking through, well, what's the solution and where do we go from here? And probably a lot of things are rattling around in your brain, but I think there's a few things we can think about. One is that we're going to have to be strategic about everything we do. We're going to have to think through every part of our process and the details of what we do and how we do it and why we do it, because there's not a lot of room for error, obviously. With the harvest being so plentiful and the laborers being so few, we're going to need to get this right. And so we need to be strategic about every single step and every single action that we take in our ministries and how we set up what we do, and again, why we do it. I think we're also going to just have to accept that things have changed. And so, for example, we might not worry about the fact that, hey, a kid visited and then they left. Because guess what? They'll probably find another church. I know growing up in a small town, it was that way. And then when I moved to a larger city, I still kind of assumed that's way, but it's not that way. A lot of times with families or the teenagers themselves, this may be the one shot they have at getting connected to church, or they may get turned off for a long time. If they have a bad experience with yours, they may not go visit around more. They may just say, well, forget it. And then maybe hopefully later in life they come back to the church. So I think these are some things that we need to consider. With that, I want to help you think through just a few different parts of your process, because I think one of the big pieces is just going, how do we connect kids? I think that's a good way to summarize it. We want kids to get connected early, and we want them to get connected often. Okay, and we've talked in the first couple of videos about ways that we can connect with them before they ever even get to the church. But now, how do we get them connected when they come back? Because I can tell you that those relationships are what we're going to keep kids there. I do not claim to be the best small group leader, okay? But I do know I've had kids who, honestly, I had them from the time they were like sophomores in high school, and they stayed till they were about sophomores in college. Now, I do see some errors in my ways on that end of not helping them to probably grow and mature and take the next steps fast enough, and I see that. But I also do know that there was a relationship there, and while some of these guys didn't always make the best choices, and sometimes after high school still didn't, they still come back, they still say hi, they still want to sit down in the small group and talk to my new guys. And I just know that's huge, and I just have seen the value in connection. And I've seen it with middle school and girls and guys. Those connections, those relationships are going to keep kids going there, keep them coming in if their parents don't come to church, keep them coming in if they make some bad choices. So we want them to feel connected. So what can we do? Well, I think a couple of things is, whether it's your traditional morning Bible study time or your midweek service, however you have things set up. You think through the process of a kid comes in the door, and we want them as soon as possible to know that they belong and know that they're connected. And so we try to do a couple of things to help in that process. And here's some ways we think you can implement. So when you add a kid, usually you've got this paper and they've got to fill it out. Well, a couple of issues with that. One is time, okay? Two is you end up losing the sheets, right? And then this kid kind of gets lost in the cracks or lost in the system. So we've tried to set up, for one, you can just get the basic info that you really need about the kid, and then everything else is optional if the child or the student wants to get it. So that way it's quicker. But two, it's immediately stored. You can also immediately put them in a group so you can get them connected, okay? So you have these different options and things happening. So you can be quick, you can be fast, but here's what I suggest doing. Have a leader with a phone or a tablet who has this form pulled up, and so while they're doing that, they're talking to the kid. So it's not like, hey, can you fill this out? Please slide out of the way. You have people specifically assigned, 2 or 3 people doing check-in. And that way, while one's doing check-in, you've got someone else ready to grab somebody. So it's a quick, fast process, okay? And then with that, you have another station where you can do attendance. And since they're added, they go, hey, we just added somebody new. They can refresh the page. Once they put in the name and the date, it's going to store everything. Refresh the page, that kid pops up on the list, and they can sit there and they can check them in. And so it's a second student or a second adult that they're already getting connected with. Then after that, I would try to make sure that you have trained your students and your adults to know and see those kids, and so that they're immediately there. Obviously, if you've got leaders, They're building those relationships and continuing those relationships with the kids they already know, and then making sure you're including that in there as well. Now, some of this is, specifically having people, volunteers, student leaders, they're ready to grab a kid. But also some of this is instilling a culture where kids look up and go, hey, I know that kid and I go to school there. You know what? I'm not a volunteer check-in person, but I know that kid, and so I'm going to go connect with them. And so all throughout that process, kids are getting connected to multiple people nonstop. So we're connecting with them early, we're connecting with them often. All right, so they're there. They've had a great experience. Now what? Well, guess what? You can't just assume they were awesome and they're just going to feel burdened to go back to church because they know that's the right thing to do. If they're lost, it's probably not the case. And so we have to kind of go, okay, well, what's the next step in the process? We have the things like the Get a Ride app and the Find a School Ministry thing we're working on where we can connect those kids to other places. But also we've got the communication tools where you can do email, text. We've got our follow-up system, okay, to where you can immediately have that opportunity to go and connect with those kids right afterwards, because you know what? Things get busy and you may just forget. And so you can set automated follow-up and email text so that those new visitors can come in and get a message that says, hey, we appreciate you coming, okay? So new visitors. And they get a series of 5 messages or 3 or 1, however you set it up. Or, and we'll talk about this another day, since they're in a group and you've got leaders assigned those groups, you just go, hey leaders, I'm challenging you every day after our midweek service, every afternoon after our Sunday morning Bible study. Why don't you sit down and do a quick follow-up with all those kids? You're probably talking about 3 at the most usually, right, for that group that they've been assigned to. And bang, those kids know they're connected. A little connection goes a long way. And so we want to make sure that we are connecting with kids. We've seen the value in it. We've seen the return on investment of that. We've seen lives change just because of a simple conversation and the kids simply knowing they were cared for. Um, even something like making sure that, hey, we send them a postcard, we send them a letter, okay? Kids love mail. So it's just another way you can do it. So we want to make sure it happens, but we also say because of that, we want to build as many tools as possible so that you make those connections and that it's simple, it's straightforward, but it is powerful. So I want you to think through your process of how you're doing things. Outreach outside the building. What do you do once they're in the building? And then what do you do afterwards once they've been there? Okay? And think strategically. And then think about how these tools can help in those processes. Not just what you're doing, but what your leaders are doing and what you're asking of them. And then is there things you need to add? Is there things you need to change? Are you doing follow-up? Maybe, you go down and you look at some of these data reports and go, wow, I've got 21 kids, but they're all visitors, okay? Now, obviously, this is just kind of a test group I have. And I go, that's a problem, right? They're not taking that next step. So what do I need to change there about everything, about what I communicate? So be strategic, be intentional. But as long as we're making those connections, those kids are going to keep coming back. You can help them experience life change. We turn around and then they help others experience life change. And then we start to change that trend. And that 4% is a distant memory. And we see God do a mighty thing in this generation.